I'm glad some of you laughed at that, because we were just saying all the references in this are probably too old for most of you. So just, it is funny if you just... I'm Russell, this is Matt, that's Port Call.
Yeah, I put that in just to make you aware that I am somewhat local and I'm used to this weather, so...
What we're going to talk about is...
do Matt and Russell know when the hell this bloody machine of theirs will be finally ready?
Yeah.
So it's kind of an anti-doing
yes.
cautionary tale in some
actually,
respects.
Seeing kind of all the brilliant talks today and yesterday, I finally worked out why we'd been asked to come and talk. And I think it's sort of for calibration. It's like, we're like a test signal.
Yeah.
So if you've got Tim and Aubrey and all that lot kind of achieving and successful up there, we're kind of here, and you want to aim in the middle somewhere. Because really what we're here to talk about is a thing that after the Little Big Voice lectures and the howies guys were talking about opening the shop in Carnaby Street, Dave asked me if I could make something to go in the shop that would kind of do community somehow, and also sort of connect the shop with Cardigan Bay, and somehow kind of build that connection. And I said yes, obviously, having no idea how to do that at all, and asked Matt to help.
Which was your first mistake?
Who I didn't know very well, really, at the time, sort of, but I thought it'd be really interesting, and that maybe if we worked together, he'd become my friend. And that's yet to be seen.
Yes.
And we did two things. We presented a load of ideas. Two of them, the first was this plans chest thing, which we haven't made, but Matt is going to talk at length about.
As a distracting tactic.
Yes.
We're going to talk at length about something we
certainly haven't tried to make.
We haven't even tried to build.
And then the second is this. This was the first sketch of this other thing, which we are trying to make, and which I will talk a little bit about. And then we'll kind of make up spurious lessons from the process that you can learn from. And so Matt's going to go first and talk about the treasure thing.
So some of you are a little bit older. Good. So this is one of the ideas we took to Dave and Aid and everybody. And it was to do with putting in the shop something which would connect Carnaby Street with Cardigan Bay and the rest of the world. And we thought, how can you do that very easily? Well, what we thought is we'll make this magical plan chest, and what we'll do is we'll put something in it, and what we'll put in it is the internet. I'm a technologist. I work with technology. I design technology every day. A lot of the stuff I'm involved with is about connecting the internet with the real world. So one of the things that I do want to talk about today is this sort of trend of the internet leaving the screen and going out in the real world, and how you can harness that to your ends. And one of the I think I put this on my book list. I don't remember. This is a very short book, but it's very, very important, I think. It's a book called Shaping Things. And it's a book primarily aimed at industrial designers, product designers, people who make things. But it's about how the process of making things and the nature of things themselves is being changed by information that is starting to sort of be imbued into these things, just like we want to put the internet into the plan chest. And that URL at the top is for kind of the essay that gave birth to this book, which I'll sort of take some quotes from. We are filling the atmosphere and the seas and the surface of the planet and our own bodies with our industrial emissions and dead junk. In a world with 6 billion people trending towards 10 billion, there is no away left in which we can throw our dead objects. Our material culture is not sustainable. Its resources are not renewable. We cannot turn our entire planet's crust into obsolete objects. We need to locate valuable objects that are dead and fold them back into the product stream. In order to do this, we need to know where they are and what happened to them. We need to document the life cycles of objects. we need to know where to take them when they are defunct. And so what Sterling is introducing is this idea of something that he calls a spime, which you don't need to worry about too much. It's just a made-up word to kind of fold up a number of concepts into. And he says the most important thing to know about spimes is they are precisely located in space and time. They have histories. They're recorded, tracked inventories, and inventoried, and they are always associated with a story. So this is a spime I grew this summer, which is a carrot, a number of carrots. They're not a bit knobbly, a bit rubbish. They're going to get better next year. But it's this idea that the reason I put in the carrots is I grew them from a seed, and one of the things that Stirling says about spimes is they begin and end as information, and they are only occasionally physical objects. And this is an interesting place that we're going to be going very, very soon, is that we're going to be able to... I was talking to Tom, and he's been printing a book on demand. It starts as information. If somebody wants it, it gets made into a thing. If they don't want it, it doesn't get made. And that's the world that Sterling's talking about. It's a really interesting world that the world of industry and commerce is moving into very, very quickly. And this is a world that... personally, I'm very optimistic about in some ways, but it's also one that we have to kind of make sure we're also kind of, when they're associated with a story, it's the stories that we want to keep telling about our life on this earth. But this world of objects that are throwing off information all of the time about themselves, telling you where they are, telling you what can be done with them, is something that I investigate an awful lot in my work. And in terms of, it's not just objects, it's us as well. And this world of kind of us throwing off information into the internet is something that Tim was talking about. You know, if you get it out there, it's almost like a permanent record. Well, we're producing permanent records about ourselves all of the time. This is a slide done by my friend Tom Coates. Just his little kind of classification of the stuff that we're putting out there at the moment. So there are things like personal sensors. So if you are diabetic or you have a heart condition, often you'd be wearing sensors to report back to a medical facility or something like that. Well, that's getting kind of turned into consumer products much more widely. GPSs, heart rate monitors, all of the stuff that a lot of people here probably in their enjoyment of sports are starting to use an awful lot more. These are things that we're connecting together and using an awful lot. There's direct reporting, telling the world what I'm doing, writing a blog post. I'm going to be doing this on whenever it is. There are bureaucratic sources, which is a kind of very ungainly term for things like bills. So when we do things in the world, actually kind of they get reported back to us sometimes as bills, right? So and a lot of people are very fixated about their behavior right now because the reporting back that's coming in the bills is really kicking them in the arse about their energy use. There are a couple of companies doing very interesting things, opening up the data that companies are reporting on you so you can use it in your behavior. Sensors in your environment, weather stations, pollution sensors, attention data. That's sort of what are we looking at? What are we viewing? Google makes use of this all of the time to make sense of the web. But things like services like Last.fm, which sort of which look at what music you're playing and then share it with your friends, and then you get things back from that. And this last one, which is sort of coming over the horizon, which Sterling talks about in his book, objects that report to the network, which is a very Orwellian formulation of it, but kind of things that tell their own stories and tell their stories of what's happened to them, where they've been, and how they should be used for spime. And kind of the magical glue between all of these things is the internet, the biggest machine that we've all ever built. Some of you might have seen this in the Howies store or on Howie's website. This is, who's seen this before? Anyone? Great. This is a wonderful little thing called Watson. And it looks like a really nice kind of thing you'd want on your coffee table or the rest of it. What it's actually doing is telling you how much energy you're using in your house all of the time, and it's telling this story to you. There's a little clip that goes around where the electricity comes in the house, and it monitors how much you're using. And because it's displaying it back to you and making this invisible behavior of yours visible, then it means that you can kind of react to it and use that feedback to change your behavior. And the fact that we're kind of sharing all of these things right now and sharing all of these behaviors, all of this information, all of this invisible stuff that wasn't visible before is super interesting. And we're right at the beginning of making sense of it and making use of it. And so, that's kind of one of the things that I think that we should be doing. And the other thing that kind of obsesses me is the fact that a lot of this is about the internet and information getting out into the real muddy, lovely, wonderful world. And an awful lot of it, as I said, is actually coming from the world of kind of outdoor sports. This kind of physical generation of digital stuff and how it could be monitored and visualized and made use of, not just by big companies, but by individuals and people who are coming together as collectives. This is a project by some friends of mine called Stamen in the States. And what they did is they took all of the GPS receivers that were in the taxi cabs in San Francisco and just kind of visualized it over time. And what you get is I don't know if any of you are familiar with the kind of the geography of San Francisco, but you get this wonderful kind of tracery of San Francisco, and then you sort of start to see patterns which make sense and stories that make sense to you. So this one here, this very fast line down here, is the trip to the airport. So of course, that's where most people are taking taxis. And then this is the downtown, and then this is the kind of most of the residential stuff. And you see it change over time, and you see the story of the city change over time. Can you see what this is? London, yeah. So there's the Thames. There's Regent's Park. This is a visualization from a project called openstreetmap.org. And OpenStreetMap started as a response to the fact that in the UK, information about where you are and what's around you is not ours to manipulate or share or work with. It's Crown copyright. It's owned by the Ordnance Survey. And what they wanted to do was to create an open, shareable, open source resources of maps that everybody could use. And so they started this, and they started creating projects to do this. And this map of London was generated by 20 people in, I think, 6 weeks, just wandering around with little GPSs on them. And you get this very recognizable and actually quite beautiful map of London. You see obviously the kind of brighter bits are where people are, the more populous bits. Not more populous, but the places where these people were walking most in that 6 weeks. But the fact that few people with just a little bit of 200 quid dropping all the time technology can create something which governments are locking up and charging a hell of a lot of money for is something which really inspires me. This is a project by Christian Nold, who's a very interesting technologist and activist. This is a project he's been doing for quite a while called biomapping, which is about taking that GPS and locative data and then overlaying on top of it another sensor basis, which is stress. So he's been making stress maps of cities. And this is my favorite there's lots of visualizations of it. My favorite one is this one, you probably can't see it at the back, is this huge spike in the corner down here is entitled Yacht Club Sneaky Drink. So somebody was very worried about being found out there. But this is something that we wanted to get into the treasure chest, into the plans chest, was telling stories with maps and telling stories of what people have been doing in places and bring it all to Carnaby Street. And telling stories on maps and using maps to tell stories is another very big trend. And some of them are very big stories. This is a piece of work that Stamen, who did the cab spotting, who I do some work with occasionally, just put live. And this is a hurricane visualizer, which shows the story of Hurricane Hannah, which has just caused a lot of devastation in Haitian Republic, Haiti. And it's terrifying if you go and play with this. And because you can go and play with it, you can interact with it, and you can see what's going on, you start to make up your own story in a good way and put two and two together for yourself through using just raw data visualized in a way that's going to bring it home to you. Two very little stories, and this is a great, brilliant website called fixmystreet.com. And all it asks you to do is to do one thing: put your postcode in, and then when you put your postcode in, so this is the howies postcode, it doesn't give you a big view of the world, big sort of Google Earth view of the world. It gives you kind of where you could walk in 10 minutes. And it asks you, are there any problems? Is there anything that's pissing you off? Is there anything that you want fixed? And we've connected this up to every email address and everything that we could find around your local council. And we will email them for you. And we will keep nagging them. And they will tell us when it's fixed and you can come back here. And go and have a look at this idyllic place that you live. No problems have been reported yet, so get to it anyway. But there are several holes in the road, 29.8 kilometres from here, so life isn't so rosy after all. What else? Fly tipping, microwave, continued dumping of rubbish into watercourse. You know, these are great little tools for people who, again, you know, it's the lesson of the internet. It's for kind of bringing people together who thought they were alone and didn't have a voice to bring them together. And actually bringing them together based on the real world now is the thing that's really interesting now. It's not a separate second life. This is actually, you know, the internet overlaying on the real world and real world problems. And this, Tim was talking about, he's just come back from Burning Man. Who knows what Burning Man actually is? Kind of a few of you anyway. It's a kind of temporary autonomous zone for hedonistic types on the West Coast. And they set this city every year in the Nevada desert. And because it's temporary and it goes away after a week, it doesn't appear on a map. Except it does, because OpenStreetMap is now international. And so the interesting thing is that people who really care about something or really care about a place are starting to make their own maps about it. And so you have lovely things here like Spanky's Wine Bar, Red Nose District, couch surfing camp. All of these things which would never be recorded on an official map are now on the internet usable as resources through OpenStreetMap. So I think OpenStreetMap is just really great. If you care about something, I know there are several projects, people who are really worried about trees being removed, those kinds of things, and they're making extremely detailed maps about things they care about. So the Ordnance Survey or a kind of top-down mapping would just do a general coverage, if you see what I mean. But here you have this kind of mapping resource of things that people really care about. And so one of the things that we were thinking about doing for howies to go in the plan chest was kind of like an open mud map. So could we find all these places where people are having fun around and make really detailed, wonderful maps reporting back of where people have been doing things there. So that's one thing we certainly haven't done, but we're... And this, I think this is another kind of big overarching trend, is this thing of making the electronic sensors and things reporting to the internet, making the invisible visible. This is a project called Nuage Vert, which was in Helsinki. I lived in Helsinki for 2 years or so when I was working for Nokia. And Finland have power plants in their downtown areas and things like that. They have, you know, no such thing as NIMBYs there. And Nuage Vert was just this wonderful installation where they used lasers to project the outline of a cloud coming out of the cooling tower, but the size and proportion and movement and behavior of that cloud was based on people's energy usage in Helsinki and people participating in this experiment. So you had all of these people, a bit like the Watson, kind of, but doing it at a city scale and sort of seeing this kind of collective responsibility for what they were doing visualized. And these sorts of things are really, really interesting. And in my day job, I'm able to do a little bit of this. So I have a small company, and we have a website where we are giving people tools to make their kind of travel behavior and impacts of their travel more visible. And so we sort of work with a company called AMEE, which is AMEE, which is an open source carbon calculation platform, which anybody can plug into, anybody can prove. And we use that to kind of represent back to people the impacts of their travel, of the trips that they're doing. And we've just this week kind of started to apply it across corporate domain names. and we're hoping that we get into some trouble for this. We probably are going to get into trouble for this. But it's starting to represent back to people, back to companies, what they're doing in their travel. And a lot of them are going through travel freezes right now and trying to reduce things and trying to behave a little bit more responsibly. But again, if we can kind of we're not trying to say to them, go and do carbon offsets or any of those problematic things. We're just trying to give people better weighing scales, and then they can sort of decide themselves what the diet's going to be. But within that, there are some things that can be done. So this is one of my favorite examples, which is the Toyota Prius hybrid car. I think one of the genius things that they did in this was make the default display MPG rather than MPH. And one thing that you do, if you do kind of if you visualize something, if you give people a scales or a measurement, I think somebody else measured it, what gets measured gets managed. My favorite formulation of that is if you give something a score, it becomes a game. And the game of driving a Prius is to keep your MPG as high as possible. And you go to these wonderful websites of people who found kind of ways to hack their Prius to make it even more responsive, and sort of putting I'm a technologist and I hang out with a lot of video game designers and things like this. So getting these kinds of win states into systems where you're having these gentle encouragements towards behaviors that benefit us all are something I'm very interested in designing. This is a guy called Raf Costa who designs video games, and you can ignore this very long and wordy quote about game mechanics, but introducing game mechanics into things that nudge people in certain ways and encourage people to explore and learn kind of new behaviors is something that I'm very, very interested in. This is kind of more of a digestible quote from him, which is, once we see a pattern, we delight in tracing it and seeing it reoccur. And kind of these game mechanics and these things that we could put into something like the treasure chest to kind of encourage people to explore, learn, monitor what they're doing, monitor the impacts of their behaviors, and feedback on them and change them is something that is really interesting and trending up all the time in technology. And with that, I'm going to hand you over to Russell for the next machine that we haven't built yet.
Right. You're now in for a lot more superficiality, frankly, and more failure. So the idea of this device, again, was about connecting Cardigan Bay and the wider kind of howies community with the shop. It was a relatively simple idea, which was just that what we have asked people to do and are asking people to do is kind of howies customers, or anyone who's interested, frankly, to stick pictures in a group on Flickr, which is a photo sharing site. And then what we will do, and what this machine will do, is take those pictures, kind of take one at a time, and turn them into postcards, a kind of a unique one-off postcard that will get generated and made in the shop. So that's a thing that can happen in the shop. You're not helping, Matt.
Okay, sorry.
And so, unique one-off postcard with a date stamp or something on it that makes it kind of yours, and that's one of a kind. So there's a kind of wider community thing going on to create a little unique kind of one-off thing, which in theory is dead easy. In a lot of ways, dead easy. But what we kind of did is we sort of fell in love with with this little bit that says "ding" here, kind of with the possible beauty of it. So no, anyone from Nottingham? Someone here from Nottingham? Good man. So there's a clock in Victoria Centre in Nottingham, which is by a guy, I'll turn it down a little bit, Roland Emmett, who's kind of a Heath Robinson, Wilf Lund kind of guy. And he built the machines for Chitty Chitty Bang Bang as well, built these kind of sausage machines. And one of the things that's gone on in making this project is we spent a long time wondering how pointless it needs to be. Because if it's not pointless to a certain extent, there's no point to it. It's kind of, the pointless stuff is what makes culture. It's kind of what makes beauty. It's the stuff you don't actually need, but kind of want as well. So it would be very easy just to have a printer printing postcards. We kind of spent the whole time thinking about, well, how can we make that more interesting, kind of more beautiful, more engaging, more pointless somehow? And this sort of has been, for me at least, kind of a model all the way through of kind of, you know, obviously he could just, this machine is not a time or labour-saving device, you know. It sort of, the conceit is that it is, but it's about kind of making this whole experience kind of just more enjoyable, better, but less pointful. You know, it's kind of, he's wasting time and resources, frankly. But, you know, you can kind of understand it. And also you sit there and go, well, you could do it a lot better if you did this. And you kind of go, but again, that's not the point. It sort of has to be something like that. And you'll see, this is a bit long, you'll see from where we've got to that a lot of what we've been talking about is kind of what's the optimum level of pointlessness for the machine. But I'd say the most successful thing we've got so far has been the community of people who've contributed to the photo pool. So all we did is, and again, I think it's one of the interesting things about this project, and one of the scary things about this project is it's very open. We've kind of, every stage of it we've written about on our blogs. Aid stuck it on the Howies blog. But part of what did that is led to people putting pictures in the Flickr pool. So there are hundreds and hundreds of pictures in the Flickr pool now. Really nice stuff, actually, as well. So there's this resource of pictures there of people who've kind of, you know, volunteered to contribute somehow to this project. And, you know, as I say, there's some really nice things in there. Hopefully we'll get to some of the other pictures. And again, one of the things is that the machine of the internet and Flickr makes it incredibly easy to do. And we didn't have to build any of this. You know, what a lot of this project is about is tapping into stuff that's already there, and kind of using the resources that are already there. And Flickr is a great example. These are some of the better ones. I guess someone here might have taken some of these. Anyway, so what kind of led to our downfall, frankly, was a site visit. We went, just before the shop opened, we went with Aid to have a look at it and see what we could do, and kind of were seized with physical prototyping fever, and realised that this is the shop kind of looking out. They're the doors there, and that's kind of these are the security things in the door. And this is Henry, who cleverly, because although I'd recruited Matt pointed out he couldn't build anything either. We recruited Henry, who can't be here because this guy can actually make the thing. So this is Henry here. But we kind of were seized with the idea that what we could do is we could have the printer here, make a kind of lift elevator thing here that would lift the postcard up to the top of the shop here. It would go down a kind of railway kind of thing and hit a spiral here, spiral down to the bottom into a kind of bell thing, into a basket thing, and make a little ding, and you've got a postcard. And you just kind of thought that would be sort of magical cabaret theatre, technology, Lun stuff, and it would just be good. And that's what we've been trying to make ever since. Early starts were promising. Henry started off by building the spiral. That's Henry's brother. They're in their kitchen. And we were sort of captivated by the magic of that. It is just beautiful to watch that thing go down there. It's really nice. And that spiral is made out of its old plumbing supplies with the bottom of toy cars. So the chassis of Matchbox cars as the kind of conveyor. And that was really good. So we then kind of just basically did a lot of tinkering. So this is part of the device that lifts the thing up. And we were trying to work out what the optimum weight was. So these are kind of fishing weights of Henry's dad's fishing kit, I think. And you know, there's more. So it's lots of Meccano webbing from they're from seatbelts, aren't they, or something? Webbing from seatbelts, things like that. That's a close-up of the cars, which just works really nicely. So it's all kind of, you know, found stuff basically to make this machine. We also involved the broader community in thinking of a name for the thing. So Aid stuck a post on the Howies blog of the picture, "We need a good name," and the name Instorematic came out of that process, which I think is really good, from Reese. Thanks, Reese. Do you want to say anything about that?
Hey?
Do you want to say anything about that?
It's a very good likeness of Aid. I think it's, but Reese actually had a bit of probably steward's inquiry around the name competition, because I actually used to work with Reese, and he worked for Nokia, a really brilliant project that he led there called the Nokia Remade Project, which was all about reclaimed materials and those sorts of things. Anyway, carry on.
Yes. And to be honest, we had quite a lot of fun kind of sticking these things together and kind of making it and prototyping it. You know, as you can see, physically it kind of got quite a lot closer. Look at that, it works, it works, it works.
But
that's Henry. We just discovered that we were just being too optimistic with this car kind of mechanism. It worked occasionally. It just wasn't repeatable enough. And we spent a long time kind of going, well, can we make that a feature? Could we? Could we put? We thought about, you know, we thought we'd put a target at the bottom of the spiral, and then you get points for how close it came to the middle. Which we still might end up doing that, frankly. But in the meantime, Henry has devised another solution based on using recycling toy railway track. So we're going to try that for the next thing. So where we are with the thing, just for Aid's benefit, if nothing else, where we are is actually what we have got working is the software. And that will be kind of an open source project as well. It's based on an open source project. It's an adaptation of that. So that will be available for people it will generate postcards out of Flickr and make them for your event and your thing and that kind of thing. So once that's done, that will be out there. Cards are printing nicely. Do you want to? That's not the real paper yet, but they're kind of printing nicely. And we are nearly there. And we've been nearly there for almost over a year now. But we are genuinely nearly there. So then, kind of spurious lessons to be deduced from this, and thoughts about this. First thing is, anyone who makes stuff or is involved in the kind of the process of making physical stuff in the world will realise will know that there's an eternal triangle, which is fast, cheap, good. And that you can only have two. If you want something fast and cheap, it won't be good. If you want something fast and good, it won't be cheap. There's just this triangle that seems eternal in most kind of creative and manufacturing processes. And one of the things I've realised in doing this and a few other things, and that you see kind of around when you look at projects that have grown out of the web and have grown out of other places, is there's a new sort of project arriving, which I think of as the slow project, in the same way as you have slow food or something like that. Obviously, what I'm doing is reframing our failure as a massive trend. But there does feel to be this thing emerging of the free project because of the slow project. Because what this is about is you're asking for volunteer help, so people who are doing it in evenings and weekends, which is what Henry's doing. And you want these things to be good, otherwise you wouldn't bother doing it. You're not going to do it for no money if it's not going to be any good. So kind of inevitably it's going to be slow. Now that's relatively slow. The internet enables enormous amounts of speed. Pre-internet, if we'd wanted to gather the pictures of 700 people, that would have taken forever, and that happened almost overnight. But there are only certain advantages you can gain when you're dealing with physical stuff. And you realise that there are advantages and disadvantages with a slow project, and different management challenges. Like one of the key, I think, management challenges with a slow project is remembering that you're doing it. Because you kind of, it can go for 3 months, you go, oh God, we've got to do that. And motivation over that kind of period, and how you delicately nudge people that you haven't spoken to for 6 months and that kind of thing. But one of the things it builds in, which is brilliant, is lots of opportunity for failure. And one of the kind of the things, again, that you learn from working on the web a lot is that kind of connected world reduces the cost of failure to kind of almost zero. And you can just try things all the time. And you keep trying, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter. It's not cost you much. The kind of sainted Clay Shirky always talks about, or talks about what this generates is a kind of world of publish, then filter. So you can just put stuff out there, and you'll work out whether it's good afterwards. And so that kind of culture of trying, tinkering, trying things, doing, frankly.
No, we tied it together at the end.
Yeah, it's really good. Is kind of enshrined in this. It's harder in the real world because, you know, failure has a slightly higher cost in the real world than it does online. But that somehow the spirit still seems to work. And then the other thing that I think comes out of this is how you get people involved in this kind of project. One of the other things I do is organise these conferences, which are just called Interesting. And this is kind of time-lapse of the last Interesting. And the idea is simply to get people to come and talk about what's interesting to them. There's no kind of other agenda than that, basically. And they give short talks about interesting things. And it turned into kind of quite a popular thing, I think mostly because of the bunting. But it's sort of, which just gives that Festival of Britain kind of spirit. We should have bunting here. But you learn a couple of things out of it. The first is these events, these things go so much easier if all you do is the main thing you want to do. Like Interesting, we just book a hall, organise some speakers, and tell people about it. There's no badges, there's no swag, there's no little things in bags, there's no pens with logos printed on them, there's no sponsors, there's barely any refreshment. And it's just, we do the minimum thing that everyone's there for. And it turns out everyone's fine with that. You don't need all the frippery that around the edge, which kind of everyone assumes, oh, if you're having a conference, then you need this and you need that. And you can just go, no, let's just do the main thing that we're doing. The other thing, I think, is that you learn from this sort of stuff, is in kind of the marketing, or not the marketing of them, but the way you talk about them. We're in a world of kind of enormous media choice and all that kind of stuff. And what we get told in that world is the way to get our cause out there and for get people to hear us is to be very clear and very concise and kind of to boil our message down to something very kind of simple, and so everyone will get it and hear it. The problem is that's dead boring. That the simple, concise, clear message leaves no room for other people to think. And people, they might understand you, but they're not interested in you. And being interesting is much more important at the moment than being convincing. You can kind of be interesting first and convincing second. If you try to be convincing first, everyone will tune you out. So I think one of the reasons this stuff works is we've never really written a manifesto about it. We've not really said what it's for or why you should come. I kind of try and discourage people, actually, and lower expectations, because that makes it more interesting and more intriguing, and it gives room for people to think. There's a kind of old saying, if you want to build a better mousetrap, you've got to leave room for the mouse. And so much kind of communication stuff is just so loaded with meaning, and it's very precise and very clear. It doesn't leave room for anyone else to be involved. So a bit of vagueness kind of helps there. Which I guess, so what we're saying is...
Don't ever finish anything.
Don't ever finish anything. And
be vague.
Be slow and vague.
But do.
But do. At all times do.
At all times do.
And I think...
That's it. Yeah.
That's it. Thank you very much.